Welcome back to the Choose UCalgary Podcast. My name is Arista and I'm your host for Season 9. This is my final episode for the Choose UCalgary Podcast before your new host takes over to start Season 10. I'm especially excited for this episode as I get to talk to some students and a professor within the School of Architecture, Planning, and Landscape. And I will be starting all of my classes in this school in the fall to complete my minor in architectural studies. Today we'll be chatting with Dr. Chad Connery, an assistant professor in the School of Architecture, Planning, and Landscape, and Chloe and Hayley, two students in the Bachelor of Design and City Innovation program. We will be talking about the Bachelor of Design and City Innovation program, what studio classes look like, and what future students have to look forward to. I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, and that the City of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Districts 5 and 6. The City of Calgary has always been my home, but I'm only a second-generation Canadian on my dad's side, reminding me of how thankful I am for being able to attend school, live, and work on the lands of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda Nations. Which reminds me how important it is to remember that everything done at the University of Calgary campus, including podcast recordings, starts with these lands. Please keep this in mind as you listen to this podcast. Start off, could we just kind of go around and introduce yourselves, your role within the School of Architecture, Planning, and Landscaping, as a student, what year you're in, that kind of stuff?
My name's Chloe Liao. I'm a second-year student in the BDCI. I'm currently the vice president internal of the BDCI's Student Association. I'm also a research student under this faculty's, one of the faculty's research labs.
Hi, my name is Hayley Miller, and I am also a second-year BDCI student.
And I'm Assistant Professor Chad Connery with the Architecture program within SAPL, though I teach a fair bit within the BDCI in the undergrad, which is sort of interdisciplinary. And I'm also the coordinator for the program for undergraduate research experience for our undergrad programs.
To start off, why don't you just talk a bit about what the Bachelor of Design and City Innovation is, and what do students get to study and focus on, and what does that kind of look like?
To me, the Bachelor of Design and City Innovation is a program where we study design broadly in the context of the city and the built environment, and we look at topics in entrepreneurship and data science and sustainability, and we kind of look more broadly in the first 2 years, but we've just applied to concentrations in architecture or landscape architecture, or there's also the option to pursue the design degree more generally, and there's a few different minors that we can take.
Yeah, I think there's quite a few topics and themes that we go through within the program. This year we learned about landscape ecology, and then last semester we learned all about parametric design, so more of that computational sort of design. We learn a lot of a wide array of different softwares after kind of getting used to the analog sort of design, how to actually do plan drawings with the pen and paper.
Maybe I'll help sort of build out the sort of philosophy for the program a little bit, but I think the BDCI program is envisioned within SAPL at U of C as a sort of a more innovative take on undergraduate design education in Canada. It's a program that is not accredited by any of the professional bodies, say like to be an architect or a landscape architect, but is a feeder program into the graduate programs, the professional schools where you actually have that level of accreditation that sort of puts students on the track towards their various professions. But in contrast to many of the other environmental design focused undergrads in Canada, the BDCI's has a focus and a sort of an initiative to look at city innovation as a focus, sort of a future forward, open-ended perspective on what city building is, not just within the traditional sort of building professions of planners, architects, landscape architects, these kinds of people, but also working at all scales. So we're bringing in industrial design, fashion is a topic, as well as sort of systems thinking, making sure that data visualization is a major component, computational design being one of the sort of fundamental things that we sort of try to lay in parallel all the way through the program with other forms of study, sustainability, social concerns, economic concerns, all of these things, trying to build a really diverse and rich base of an undergraduate design education for students to be able to sort of jump into those professional programs from with a little bit more breadth and awareness about the world we're living in rather than the sort of more traditional takes on design professional education.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess you kind of mentioned like the possible future careers and aspirations that can come out of this program. And it's not just like architecture, planning, and landscaping. It's so much more than that and very flexible in the program and like what you can do with it and everything like that.
So Hayley mentioned all the minors that you can take. The program is really designed to be less of a bottleneck than a lot of design undergrads. So certainly my design education, which was design all the time, and sort of like a really sort of myopic focus on the physical outcomes of design without maybe so much of the sort of contextual education that's necessary to understand design's place in society. And to sort of assist that, the program allows for a range of different electives to come alongside of the sort of necessary required courses that sort of build that design education. So students can specialize in, I think sustainability is going to be a really popular one. We offer internal sustainability courses as well as external ones inside of the program, the sustainability program here on campus. Also thinking about as sort of a la carte as students want to make it. I think one of the things that's been talked about is the idea that you could go and take some schools within the School of Medicine here, and then when you exit, you could specifically go into healthcare design. Or you could be looking at education and go into educational design, which is a major industry here in Canada. You know, it's a huge territory of the architectural profession. But the idea that we're not just training people to be architects or any particular design profession, but we're training them to be citizens that are open-minded and sort of like have a understanding of what the landscape looks like so they can go out into the world and actually sort of change things.
Yeah, that's awesome. I guess as students in the program, how has your career aspirations kind of shifted or changed, or have they changed, and what were they when you kind of came into this program?
When I came into the design program, I wasn't very knowledgeable on a lot of like architecture, landscape architecture. I was kind of just like, oh, this seems like I can do a lot of change in the world with this degree. And I think still I'm not really looking towards the architecture, landscape architecture sort of career paths. I think planning would be like a good fit, but I think the degree also prepares you a lot for like if you want to go into like public policy, you do have background knowledge in like design justice, like the history of how design has like impacted people in the past, and you can look into like or SEPDED, which is crime prevention through environmental design. So there's a lot of different avenues you can go off of.
I think for myself, I just finished my third year at U of C, and I started in urban studies with the intention of doing the minor in architecture. And I was originally interested in architecture from the perspective of like how I enjoy learning, and I really enjoy like a tangible output and like visually seeing the output of my work. And I took Architecture 201 in my first year, and that's how I came to know of the program. And then when I transferred over, I'm very happy that I did, because I'm starting to develop those design skills and see design through many different lenses, and it really opens up the way that I think I perceive the world and I understand things, and it's a good background into my decision of like, do I still want to go into architecture? And I think that I'm still leaning in that direction. I've applied to the concentration, but I also feel like my options have opened in the sense that I'm not married to it, and I'm developing skills that will prepare me to go into other things if I want to do that. So
I think that perspective is really representative of a more sort of contemporary reality of what careers look like today as well. You know, if we go back 30 or 40 years where you would sort of launch into a career and have the same career throughout your life all the way to retirement with one company or one outfit, it's just not what we see in the data anymore as the most common experience. And so having that sort of like finding yourself period within your academic life and having it be a valid education that supports a multiplicity of different outcomes, I think is a really attractive model that really offers students a chance to find their way towards doing something meaningful and sort of have open ideas about how they can move that forward in the future.
I do think that like Chloe and I have an interesting contrast in like maybe reasons why we were initially interested, but there's absolutely that kind of newfound interest for me in how the built environment is impacting like the social landscape, and I have this like desire to kind of like explore those topics now, and like I'm interested in more of planners look into and what that would look like. Like it's a developed interest for sure.
Thank you. Awesome. So within the Design and City Innovation program, it's a lot of like studio classes and hands-on learning opportunities. What does this kind of look like, and what research have you kind of been a part of as students?
Yeah, I think jumping into like these studio classes right like straight out of high school, where like all of high school it's kind of just been like sitting in class listening to lectures, and then now you've jumped into studio and it's all like hands-on sort of stuff. At least for me, it was quite jarring, but I think it was a welcome change. I think the sort of like iterative design process really like makes you more creative, and like it's, I don't know, I think it's just like much more fun, and I'd rather prefer that than just like, I don't know, sitting in a lecture room.
I think if you would have asked me at the beginning of the BDCI, I would have said that absolutely not. I do not want to work in a group, but I find that in the BDCI, there's the opportunity to work with people with different strengths. And so I think that I've had the experience of being in a group where everyone kind of has the same strengths and weaknesses, and then comparing that to a group where I have strengths in certain areas and somebody else has strengths in certain areas. And I actually quite enjoy that because I think that different perspectives are good. And as we move through the program, it's nice to work with people who also care and who are also engaged. And I think that the BDCI program does kind of foster that sort of environment. Like, people are interested. I find it engaging. Like, in a studio, I'd absolutely rather work with a group.
I can talk about, we could do this whole thing just on what is studio culture.
Yeah.
Probably. I'm a pretty aggressive supporter of studio culture in education, and I think it's definitely, as Chloe mentioned, you jump in from high school and it can be a bit of a jarring experience. I definitely totally relate to that, as having that my own journey through that as well. But especially for those people that it sort of clicks and fits with, which is a pretty broad range of people because there's a lot of ways to do it in a lot of different kinds of studios within a design education. The studio is a really magic space inside of an academic system. It's a strange kind of laboratory in which students are invited to tackle challenges, sometimes in the abstract and sometimes sort of based on real world examples, and sometimes actually collaborating with external partners, even at higher levels of education generally. And it's a kind of safe space for students to explore their ideas and sort of test things while building skills up in a sort of a place where simultaneously it's, free and open and blue sky, and yet there are real consequences to it in that you are being sort of measured and measuring yourself against your colleagues and those, ahead of you in the school, and those that are even, as you guys go later into the program, the people that are underneath you as well. And it's a really kind of strangely both collaborative and competitive environment in a way that I just think is so interesting. I mean, what other opportunities in society do we have where we get, up to like 100 plus people in one room, all to work on one challenge for 2 months or more at the same time, and then compare all of the outcomes and look at like, oh, they did it this, and oh, they tackled it this way, and like there's these different approaches and flavors, and there's different aesthetics that we can bring into it from different sort of design sort of schools of thinking. And students, one thing I really love is when students start to bring their background into it. Hayley and I worked on a proposition for a research project last year that didn't ultimately end up going forward, but it was entirely based on like a couple comments that you made based on your background, your life experience, right? About being sort of on having familiarity with rural living in Alberta and what the sort of design ecology of that looks like. So that I love this idea that the studio is one of the rare places in the university where student backgrounds really come in, whatever that identity is. And, as some of our senior faculty in the BDCI say, within the BDCI, no matter who you are or who you think you are or what you want to be, there's a place for you that sort of works because you're bringing your identity as a part of the sort of project of sort of becoming a designer.
It's awesome. Thank you. As students, and even for a professor who does research with students, what's been like your favorite research project within the Bachelor of Design and City Innovation, and why is that one your favorite?
I think my favorite studio project has been the one that I just finished this spring semester. We did Parametric Fashion Studio. I think it was so fun. It was basically looking at kind of like the climate and kind of like speculative design, like imagining a world that has been really affected by climate disasters or anything about the climate, and kind of designing fashion that has adapted to that sort of climate problem. me and my studio partner, we had separate kind of projects, but we had the similarity of like hypoxia. So mine was focused on wildfires, so it was kind of like that smoke inhalation, you don't get that clean air. And then my partner had kind of a world where the plants have changed, so it's instead of consuming carbon dioxide, it consumes oxygen, so it's a more hypoxic environment. We combined kind of the aesthetics of our projects and that sort of hypoxic sort of climate problem together, and to create this like kind of evil looking not gothic, but like, I don't know, it was this like historic looking piece that I think I'm very proud of.
Yeah, that's awesome. That would definitely be really interesting to be able to kind of get hands-on experience in that and to build an idea from the ground up and really get that view of like your project turning into something real and changing and morphing into this real tangible thing, right?
So Chloe and I just finished the same studio, so I would actually also say that it was my favorite studio, maybe for different reasons. It's not so much that I wasn't as interested in the world building exercise, that like I think that speculative design and thinking about the future in kind of new and interesting ways and like imagining it is interesting, but what actually really got me with the studio is applying what I've learned this semester about digital fabrication. And so taking my digital model from like 3D space and then bringing it as like a physical output in the real world, and just the accuracy that we were able to achieve was very satisfying, and just learning all of the techniques like the 3D printing and the laser cutting, and I really enjoyed it. Like I found it very, like I said, satisfying, and it was just a good studio. Like it was challenging, like it was very challenging, but there was like enough kind of reward throughout, and I enjoyed working on the project like right from when we came back to reading week to the end of the semester. That was like I had a great partner for that studio, which really helped.
I think one thing that's notable about the studio that you both finished that I really appreciate from someone outside that was sort of observing it is that, you know, you both had really successful projects in your teams that I was able to see right at the end as they sort of came together. But it's such a cool demonstration of that studio specifically, of any of the classes that have been run yet, which maybe speaks to you guys selecting it for that question, is that it takes a really strange position in that it is simultaneously not one of the traditional environmental design professions. It's a fashion studio. It's not a traditional manufacturing thing in that it's parametric. And then it applies sort of a global problem of sort of like climate thinking to apply to those like small scale and like material made sort of situations. And the studio then simultaneously takes this long sort of 4-month swing from completely abstract speculative thinking about world building and alternative ways that things might be, down to the nitty gritty of how you actually fabricate a real world object at 1-to-1 that is literally worn by a model in the sort of like runway show review at the end. Like what a fabulous range of experiences and sort of like challenges to have to go through, and the sort of like mental musculature that you build and sort of thinking dexterously from one challenge to the other in that transition is like so much more interesting to me than a conventional design studio that might just be looking at like design a house or something like that, which, you know, those can be really fun too. Some of my favorite studios I've ever taught, certainly, but I had so much fun watching your team's work on that work is really, really cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. So there are Trans-Scholar studios within the Bachelor of Design and City Innovation program. What are these studios and what do you kind of do in them and stuff like that?
So the Trans-Scalar studios, it's not really based on like studio based on architecture, studio based on landscape and planning. It's more of like a small scale. So like maybe it's like person, like the site is the person. And medium scale, maybe it's like a house that you're designing, or just a building. And then large scale, it could be as big as like an entire park or a skyscraper that you could be designing. I think it's more productive than just like the architecture, landscape, and planning, because you get to explore so many like different avenues. Like you don't get to explore fashion when you have like an architecture, landscape, and planning studio. I think it's nice to have like those options more open. It's based more on kind of like the themes. So last semester it was community and landscape ecology, and then this semester it was
climate change and computation.
Yeah, every semester it changes, so it kind of like keeps you on your feet.
Yeah,
And I think that's what I like about it.
One thing I like about the Transcalar Studios is they all kind of relate to human experience, but at different scales. And then we kind of narrow down the conversation to our different themes throughout each semester. And then at the end, we can kind of see how that has become at the 3 different scales. And I have found it interesting to kind of see how each of the studios are approaching the different issues, especially this semester, just because it was more forward thinking opposed to last semester where our kind of more theory-based classes focused on the past, like history and things like that. So it's interesting to look at it just through many different lenses, but also like incredibly broadly.
I think the Transcalar Studios offer a really fascinating opportunity for the school to take like the SAPL's perspective on it, and that rather than siloing the studio education system in the disciplines, the sort of professional disciplines, as both of you sort of spelled out, this idea that it's sort of integrating a more interdisciplinary or even in some cases transdisciplinary approach to what design might be in our built environment. And what I think is really cool about that is as we go forward into the future, I think we see design professions changing all the time. Certainly they've changed a lot from when I was a student, and will continue to do so, especially with the climate crisis and some of the other challenges that we're facing both locally and abroad. Because it's not chained to any particular discipline, the titles of small, medium, and large allow the school to go as small as can be imagined, as large as can be imagined. So I have no doubt that within a few years we'll be running much more than a park scale at large, but maybe something that's more like national policy or, federally managed parklands or something. And at the small scale, I know we've already had conversations about like, what does a micro scale studio look like? Or even what does a completely digital sort of like metaverse based kind of like design project look? Is that small, is that medium, or is that large? Like where does that even fit? But there are a set of categories within which the school can adjust the sort of pedagogical desires of what we want to see students engaging, and also respond to student feedback on what they want to learn and sort of be able to integrate those.
Want to read more about UCalgary? Check out our Future Students blog, where you can find articles from admissions pathways, financial support, exploring Calgary, student life, all the way to UCalgary's programs and spaces. Check it out through the link in our show notes. What has been like the most fun or memorable or your favorite class that you've taken as students or that you've taught as a professor?
So neither of you were my student, but you went through the Design 201 Introduction to Studio Thinking, which is the first design studio course that required that students have to take. And when you went through it, the two of you went through it, you were only a cohort of 60, and it was quite intimate and sort of small and as a program. And because the program's sort of increasing in numbers as it sort of ramps up to its full scope, we're now sort of building that class out to fit more like 130 or more students per a year. And so I've had the privilege of being the sort of coordinator for that project and sort of re-envisioning what primary design education looks like for new undergraduate students coming either from prior life experience or direct out of high school. And I've had just a ton of fun trying to figure out how to tackle this as a design problem, as if it's any other design problem that we'd face in a studio or out in practice, about what are the basic sort of building blocks that are required to get people up to speed with a kind of visual literacy and spatial literacy for how we read the built environment, how we have sort of lexicon of terms and moves that we can deploy into the built environment, and how we can sort of just gain a kind of vocabulary with which to work. How do we give people the basic tools with which to sort of step into this sort of strange world of design as directly as possible, and then be able to like hit the ground running and have as little of that shock that Chloe referenced before, as little of that shock as possible, and sort of build it as an aggregated sort of set of skills, so that when they finish their first year and they move into the second year to the Transcalar Studios, everybody sort of has a competency with the territory that we're talking about, and they can start deploying it in all kinds of strange and wonderful ways as they go forward. So that's something that I have taught, but the program's not, we only have 2 years of students and soon to be 3 years of sort of generations of students coming into the school. And so there's new classes coming online over the next 2 years. And I'm very, very excited that in the next year, I'm going to be taking on a new building science course for our undergraduate students. And I feel very strongly about questions of material ecologies and assemblies, and not just in terms of buildings as in architecture, but as in built landscapes as well, and being able to sort of bring a more multidisciplinary approach to building science than I've ever been permitted in a teaching environment before. I'm really excited to sort of go on that journey for a semester with the students next year.
I think it's hard to pick one class, I suppose, but I think probably honestly Design 201 in my first semester of the BDCI, just because it really opened my eyes to just design generally. I've always been kind of drawn to the idea of making and to craft and creating things, but I really got pushed to kind of think outside the box in the ways that a house doesn't need to be square and you can go crazy, and the world is built and the world is a manifestation of what we imagine, and so there's the status quo, and just breaking outside of that is something that kind of Design 201 I suppose kind of taught me to do. And I think that I learned to look at things in a different way, in the sense that everything is intentional, and if things aren't necessarily intentional, it kind of stems from complacence. And I think it was actually Chad that told me once that everything that exists was once a line drawn on a piece of paper, even rurally, even quarter sections were once a line drawn on a piece of paper. And so that just kind of opened my eyes to the idea that we literally are creating the world that we live in. It's just not something that I think people think about. They just accept things for the way that they are. So
it might be pixels on a screen at this point more so, but
yeah. This is true. And then I suppose aside from that, I've enjoyed the graphics classes that I've taken in my second year, because they've kind of allowed me to develop the skills to create the things that aren't a box. And they've pushed me to explore new forms and things with the digital tools that we have today.
Other than the last studio I had with the fashion, I think it was generally all of the graphics and visualization courses that I've taken. I think that's kind of the field I've been the most strong in. But it's really fun to learn. I mean, it's also really frustrating to learn all of these new softwares like Adobe Suite, Rhino 3D. But I think once you kind of get the hang of it, the things you can create and the potential you have is very vast. And you learn so many different things. You learn how to make kind of your buildings more readable for people. It can go as technical as that, or you can go as abstract. We did we did some animations for kind of objects we've made, we've created ourselves, and then we kind of had a lot of freedom in how to visualize that. Yeah, it's just I think it speaks, or that's what I kind of speak to the most, the visual part. But I think that feeds into the studio as well. It really teaches you how to actually visualize your projects. It doesn't have to be black and white drawings. You can put so much color into it. You can really put your own style into it. And I think that's what's the most fun about studio.
Yeah, for sure.
Would either of you consider yourselves having come into the program sort of quote unquote artistic people before, creatives before coming in?
No, absolutely not. I think I was definitely I wrote essays. I was pretty good at math. I don't think I took an art class since grade 9 when I applied to BDCI, but I think kind of the studio pedagogy kind of brings out that creativity in you, especially the professors too. They kind of push you to past your boundaries, to create really cool things.
I definitely didn't think I was creative when I started design school. It's really a cool process to be oh yeah, this is a musculature thing. I can just training for any athletic thing. I can do this. It's not some magic ability that some people have and others don't.
Mm-hmm, exactly. Yeah, I was really scared when I came into the program. I was I've not picked up a pen. I don't think I can even draw a stick figure that well. But I think what kind of comforted me is that kind of when you're doing the analog architectural drawings, it's very technical, and it's based on line weights, it's based on measurements. It's kind of more of the conceptual stuff where you kind of have to be bring out your art skills. I think I was okay, I was doing pretty good for someone who didn't have that history in art.
Thank you. Yeah. So I want to give kind of a sneak peek for future students of like the collaboration in the Bachelor of Design and City Innovation program. How do you, as a professor, kind of encourage the creativity and idea sharing between students and even between faculty? And as students, like how have you either witnessed this or been a part of this throughout your time in this program?
I think the reality is that creative actions are things that everyone actually does have access to. They just have to learn that they have the agency to do so. And I think most of that comes through a kind of dialogue. A dialogue in some cases that's, verbal, but sometimes it's visual, and sometimes we really have to play that out through a process of sort of action and reaction inside of the design work. And so though in undergraduate classes, because the class sizes are larger, I don't necessarily always have that kind of like intimate place. I do think the best way to do this is really just to sit down with pen and paper with students and actually draw over their drawings with them and sort of make it like a direct collaborative action in the sort of history of sort of someone within a profession and a sort of apprentice model. That's sort of how studios typically operate. Within the larger sort of scale studios that we have in the BDCI as an undergrad program, as within Design 201, I'm the coordinator for the overall, but we have 7, or I think next year we're going to have a few more than that, sort of studio tutors that work underneath me. And so they sort of do that direct sort of one-on-one interaction and sort of still carry out that process of sort of, a student sort of having an intention or an idea based on a perspective that might be grounded in an experience that they had or something that they observe, a perception of some kind, and that the studio tutors are there to sort of assist them in realizing that in some way. And in some cases that's, we're talking that out. What does that look like? If we do this, then what? How do we sort of have a critical logic or a critical perspective on how we're going to deploy this into a design problem? And in some cases it's much more reactive, in which the expectation is that the students sort of take action in some way by designing something, making something, drawing something, and then there it is, a thing that manifests in the room in front of us, and we can all talk to it and respond to it together because it's real. It's become consequential. When all of a sudden you're working together to sew a conceptual garment, it's undeniable as a thing in the room that sparks a whole bunch of other questions and ideas that not just you, but also your colleagues, the other students in the room, and the critics that are brought in from the professions outside of the school or from other places within academia that come in. And it's sort of all about building a dialogue through all of these materials together. And if we continue that process of building dialogue and building a studio culture on sort of having a sort of dialogue of curiosity, I think it helps everyone sort of succeed long term in terms of sort of going down the road on that design process. One of the things that I'm really excited about is our participation in the undergraduate research programs here on campus. And it's been really nice to get a whole range of different faculty that teach at different levels in the school. Some of which are only teaching graduate classes, but getting undergraduate students into sort of one-on-one research environments with those professors who have all kinds of really fascinating and varied disciplinary interests, get them in the same room and working together on these projects that often have sort of a real world interface, in some cases at least. And that's been really cool to see, because then those students come back away from that research project, they come back into the courses and can deploy what they've learned in there. And so there's sort of a sort of like cross-referencing of all the aggregated knowledge of the school against itself as the school sort of like becomes more and more intertwined.
What the great thing about studio culture is that you're kind of just sitting next to all of your classmates like all day. So you could always just ask a friend or anyone in the cohort, like, hey, I did this. What do you think about this? And it's not just like your friends. Like, I think being open to like professors and not being so married to like what you have so far, being open to change allows you to like dig much deeper within your project. I think what really helped me in the first semester was being like, yeah, I don't really know anything about design, so kind of letting my professor like tell me what inspiration to look into. I remember in my first semester of this year, my studio professor was so like passionate in telling us like the precedents or the inspirations to look into, that passion and curiosity kind of like leeches onto you, and then you have so much more like motivation to like look into different projects and how you can incorporate those elements that you like into your project.
For myself, in terms of like studio collaboration and everything, just learning, I guess, that like design is a discussion, and there's not always necessarily a right or wrong answer. It's just like a gradient of success, and there's different approaches, and being able to welcome criticism and other perspectives is something that you learn to appreciate. it's potentially jarring a little bit in the beginning when you think, you're like, oh, I got it, like this is it. And then kind of understanding that even when a project is done, it's like it's not necessarily done. Like there's room for further development all the time. And I think that through collaboration, I've learned like how to solve problems and like what to do to be able to find success in the program. So like asking myself internally how I can kind of figure things out, but then also just like asking my peers and starting those conversations within studio, because I think no one knows everything, but if you are working in a group, there's more to go off of. And I think that our professors really encourage that, to like go between each other to solve problems. And there's certainly technical skills that we're required to learn and softwares that pose a challenge. So working together to figure those out has been helpful. And again, proximity, like Chloe said, we're together a lot. So it's great. I mean, you make friends, and I also enjoy that. So yeah.
I think one of the great sort of privileges of design school compared to a lot of the other programs that you can go through within a university is because so many of the classes are taken together and you spend so much of that time in that proximity, that it's a culture building machine that's quite potent. And I know that, you know, the people that I went through school with are still very, very dear friends, and, you know, became my best friends, and now they're colleagues that are dispersed all over the planet that I can go visit, and those become lifelong relationships that you form. And I think the BDCI is kind of an interesting place right now because it's a new school that we're building, and I have to give full credit and applause to Chloe and Hayley's generation. They're, as the first year, the sort of tip of the spear in building this thing, and from going from a thing that doesn't exist at all to what it was this year. I couldn't be prouder and more sort of appreciative of the labor that they've done as students in sort of building the school themselves in some ways, in terms of the sort of like social and cultural side of things. And it's just been really impressive to watch such a kind of like brave cohort of students sort of like soldier into the unknown and building this thing. And I think it promises some really good things to come.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like a community that this year's bringing as like a newer program. It's creating a foundation for a really strong community going forward as well for future students, which is amazing to have. So what's the one thing about the BDCI program that future students should be most excited about or most looking forward to, both from like the faculty perspective and from like the student perspective in your experience in the program?
I think it's the amount of opportunities you get. Like, we talked about this earlier about like just like how many career pathways you can go down, not just architecture, landscape, and planning, but opportunities within the school. So you have a lot of research opportunities over the summer. You can team up with a professor to pursue like a research project, or over during the year you can join a research lab if they're hiring and help out with their projects. There's some student leadership options open. There's different clubs within SAPL. There's the Avant-Garden Club, where they have a lot of planter boxes around campus. It kind of like opens your knowledge more to like landscape and ecology and stuff like that. There's the Society for Architectural Diversity and Equity. They've done a lot of like events talking about like racial justice and kind of equity in Calgary's Chinatown. And there's also the Student Association within the BDCI. We're kind of doing a lot of like culture building, hosting events, trying to like start traditions within the BDCI. So whatever you're interested in, there's definitely something for you here.
Professor Guy Gardner's looking for BDCI students to join the robotics club now too, within the aggressively. So there's more clubs on the horizon, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
For myself, like coming from urban studies, it's certainly a different experience. I quite enjoy it. Like, it's easy to make friends when you're with the same people for like 4 months straight every day. But it just, I don't know, I feel like I definitely like came out of my shell a little bit in BDCI. So I think that that's something that is to look forward to. And then just like the collaboration and the way that we kind of approach learning in the BDCI is like definitely different. But yeah, we like generally. We have like a topic, and then we just dig into it in like a bunch of different ways, and again, like through different scales and different perspectives, and I find that to be engaging.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of things that future BDCI students can look to, I think even for you two, the things to look forward to are the completion of this program as it sort of builds out its last 2 years of course programming. And through that, there's a work integrated learning system that the goal of which is to put students in design studios that are in direct contact with various design professions and put students effectively by proxy in the field and sort of gain a kind of like hands-on learning that's not completely abstract in the classroom but is deployed to the city. We also have sort of announced the preparations for Design 500, which is going to be a travel study course operating within the summers. And so there's travel study opportunities to actually leave Calgary and go out into the world, into different communities and study cities by being in cities, which I think is a really important part of design education. And as a companion to that, for students that want to study city in the city, here in Calgary, we're also going to be deploying some design build opportunities that I'm very, very excited to get my hands dirty on and let students engage in a design build process in sort of tackling a problem, conceptualizing approaches to that problem, figuring out a way to resolve it sort of through, the costing, economics, purchasing, and then actually going with tools and manufacturing it themselves and deploying it into the public space, which is, I think, one of the most fun things that we can do ever. It's definitely one of my passions. So I'm really excited for that, and I hope there's lots of students that are going to join us who'll be excited about those kinds of things as well. I think that students should be looking forward as well to our move to our new location. With the whole of SAPL, including the BDCI, will be moving downtown to our new building down on 7th Avenue. We'll be taking up residence in a retrofitted tower, floors and floors of studios, and in that we'll be reuniting all of the graduate programs and the undergraduate programs, as well as our postgraduate programs, PhD, research, and all the post-professional degrees, reuniting everyone together in one building since we're sort of separated right now. And I think that should be a kind of like catalyst for a real supercharging of the design culture within the school. And also it'll be locating the school downtown in the city instead of sort of located on a campus, which I think offers so many fun opportunities for student life. I just can't wait for the BDCI kind of program that's already sort of been built up here to be deployed there and just like wow the graduate program with what we can do while we're all in the same space.
And I guess last kind of question here, if you could give any advice for future students who are either looking at the Bachelor of Design and City Innovation program or just looking at UCalgary as a whole, what would that advice be?
I think one thing I would tell like prospective students to kind of look out for, some advice I would give them is that I think that it's quite a challenging program. It's so much more different than like the regular degree you have in any university. It's based on iterations, so you're not just doing something once and then you're done with it. You're designing over and over and over again. Sometimes you're still gluing things together right before you're presenting to the jury. It's definitely challenging, but it's such a fun challenge that I'm so excited for the school to open up to more students and having the new building and kind of having like the program more known to the university as a whole.
My advice would be to just like embrace it and get your hands dirty and don't be scared of challenge, because I definitely have a bit of a perfectionist kind of type A personality, and for the first few months I really struggled with the idea that something isn't going to be right immediately, and you kind of have to work through it. But yeah, just like don't be scared of challenge and don't be afraid when you don't know something, because you can do it. You'll figure it out. As long as you work hard, you'll do fine. I think that would be my biggest piece of advice, and just don't be scared of challenge.
Really building off of what the two of you said, maybe I think it's really important to come to design school with a kind of like open mind to how you might approach something. And I think it's unfortunate that primary and secondary education, in North America at least, because that's what I have experience with, really trains us to sort of think that there's a right answer for everything. It has a very kind of deterministic sort of like, this is what the outcome is, this is what we're going to do, and right answer looks like this. But the reality is that there's almost no, especially within the studio system and definitely within the graphics system, there is no right answer to any problem that's put in front of the students. There's only a myriad of wrong answers and some that kind of feel right.
Yeah.
And those sort of this like stumbling and wandering towards the right thing while sort of like learning from the wrong things feels really strange when you've only been taught how to like learn and think in a certain way. And so if it's advice for future students, I think it's to really embrace that, as Hayley's saying, and sort of like be sort of kind to yourself in that like you're not supposed to know how to do this. No, I'm still figuring this out. We're all still, they call it a design practice because it's practice. It's never finished. You just continually are developing and iterating this design identity based on how you sort of face these challenges and work through design processes. And whoever you are, whatever your skill set is, whatever your comfort level is with like visual arts or writing, or whether you're very scientific and you have maybe you're coming from, say, you actually have an architectural technologist's education, all these people can come and participate within this process sort of with equal parity. On the even level, because we all sort of bring a different perspective to it, and we have to embrace that, both that we have our own limitations and we can operate with modesty and say it's okay for me to say I don't know what I'm doing, and also that we can look at someone doing something completely different from us in a completely different way from us and say that's also a valid way of tackling this problem. And I think that's a sort of fundamental thing that has to be understood as we come into the school to make the rest of the school kind of work.
Thank you guys so much for doing the podcast with me. I think this will be awesome for our future students to hear more about the BDCI program and about SAPL as well.
Of course, thanks so much.
Yeah,
Yes, thank
thanks for
you.
the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Season 9 of the Choose UCalgary podcast. Remember to follow us on Instagram at choose.ucalgary and Facebook at ucalgaryfs to stay up to date on all things UCalgary for future students. DM if you have any questions and stay tuned for the next episode.